In this video, I'm going to show you the setup I've used to film wildlife for the last 3 years. Now, regular viewers of this channel will have seen the dragonfly tour videos and will know I spent most of last year filming dragonflies, among other species. And a few people have contacted me asking me about my setup, so I thought I'd share it with you in this video. Apart from the in-flight shots of dragonflies, pretty much everything I filmed will have been using this tripod and video head setup. The video head is the Manfrotto 502 fluid video head with a flat base. Got nice and smooth pan and tilt. You can adjust the tension as well, which is useful when you're trying to do pans too. And it also helps if you've got a heavier setup. It will take up to 7 kilo on top as well, which is far more than I need, but it gives me that extra stability with my smaller setup. The downside is it is quite big, it is quite bulky, and it is fairly heavy, but I think it's worth the extra weight. This on top of this carbon fibre silk tripod. Now, most professionals will be using a metal, very heavy tripod to give more stability, but it's better to have a tripod that isn't perfect than having one that's too heavy to carry around with you. So I've compromised a bit there and gone with the carbon fibre. Most time it gives really good stability anyway, so it does the job. In terms of camera, I use the Panasonic GH6. I was already invested in the Micro Four Thirds system when I bought a GH5. So last year I upgraded to GH6. Now there's a lot of stuff on YouTube and various other places with all the stats and why this camera is good, but I'll give you the headlines of why I use it for wildlife filmmaking. It can shoot up to 60 frames a second in 5.7K resolution, and in 4K it can shoot up to 120 frames per second. Now I use that mode a lot. It lets me slow down the action by 5 times, which with wildlife is really useful, especially dragonflies. But if I need to slow down the footage even more, I can shoot HD in 240 frames a second. And that's very useful. There is a slight drop. It's not quite as good as if you downsize the 4K to HD. And you can also push it up to 300 frames per second, but I find the quality drops a bit more then, so I tend to stick with 240. I'd say it's the best purchase I've made in terms of wildlife filmmaking. There are a couple of downsides though. The first one is the autofocus is, well, pants, really, for lack of a better word. It does focus on static subjects, but sometimes hunts, and I don't even really bother if something's moving fast. But generally with wildlife filmmaking, you want to be manually focusing anyway, so, you know, it's not the biggest drawback. The other drawback I found, especially with the higher frame rates, is when you press record, there's usually a 1, sometimes even 2-second lag between you pressing the record button and it's starting to record, which can cost you the shot. But then I've got into the practice of pressing record and then trying to focus on the subject. You also see there's a cage around the camera as well. This is the small rig cage. Very useful. First of all, gives a bit of protection, and it's also useful if you want to mount the camera onto a tripod directly and lock all your lenses and stuff together to keep a nice solid rig from which to shoot from. And it's also useful because you can mount your microphone on the side out of the way of the viewfinder too. Now, in terms of lenses, I've got a whole selection of Olympus and Panasonic lenses that I had from photography, and I've purchased a couple more just to help with the video. For wide angles, so for talking to the camera pieces like this, I've got the Olympus 12 to 40mm f2.8, which I'm using right now to film this piece. And that's useful for wide angle shots, for setting shots, you know, so I film of the lake before I film the dragonflies, B-roll, stuff like that, what I want to use it for. For close-up shots, I have the Olympus 90mm macro. I've also used the 60mm macro, but this has got a bit more reach and built-in stabilisation, so that I find is much more useful. But the lens I use the most is the Olympus 300mm f4 prime, often with the 2x teleconverter. And those two combined give the equivalent of 1200mm in reach, which is really quite useful for far-off subjects. But it's also useful for filming insects because it focuses down to nearly a metre. So you can fill the frame with a small dragonfly or a large robberfly or something like that. The other good thing about this lens is it's got a really nice big focus ring, which is really helpful for manual focusing. And it's also really nice to use when you're trying to film and photograph dragonflies in flight. But the biggest issue with it, of course, is it's a prime lens. So if something comes too close, I can't zoom out. And being stuck at 1200mm can cost you the shot sometimes. I can zoom in a little bit because the GH6 has another trick up its sleeve. If you're shooting 4K, because the sensor is over 25 megapixels, it can go into pixel to pixel mode, as they call it. That will basically crop in on the sensor, giving you another 1.5 times magnification. which can be really useful if you want to zoom in just that bit more while keeping the 120 frames per second. In the end, I decided I needed the flexibility of a zoom. So I bought this, I got it a good deal second hand. It's the Panasonic 100 to 400mm zoom. It's a nice little lens, gives the equivalent of 200 to 800mm on my Micro Four Thirds bodies. So 400mm is less than the prime and teleconverter combo, but still enough for most settings. And of course you have the flexibility of being able to zoom in and out. And I got on okay with it. It's a nice little lens. I have to admit, I did prefer using the prime. The focus ring's a bit small on this one. And yeah, there's just something about the feel of it I didn't really like. Sometimes this lens can be really stiff on the zoom as well. This one's not too bad. So for a while, I just mounted the lens directly to the tripod to keep it steady. But at times, especially if it was windy, the setup would rock slightly. It needed more stability. So I invested in a proper rig to hold the lens steady. And this is what I came up with. It's the small rig 50mm diameter rods, a bunch of 15mm clamps, universal base plate, and it's all mounted on a long Manfrotto 501 fit plate. And the lens is supported with the small rig universal 15mm lens support. Now this gives a much more steady base, and it also means it's a lot easier to adjust where it is on the head to give me a proper balanced rig, which makes panning and tilting a lot easier too. There's a few other things I have on my camera rig now as well. For audio, I use this, the Rode video mic. It's a great little mic. I've added a dead cat to try and keep the wind noise down. It's not perfect, obviously. On a windy day, no amount of sheltering the mic will stop the wind noise, but yeah, I've recorded a few birds and stuff with it and got some nice audio. And I've recently added this, the small rig V-mount battery. It doesn't actually need a V-mount mount to work. And it's got, on the top here, it's got USB-C, USB, and 8 and 12 volt outputs. So it's really useful. The GH6 does eat batteries, but if I plug this in with the USB-C cable, it'll last all day, absolutely no problem, and still have loads of battery left. I also have this, the DesView R7P screen. This is very useful, especially if you're doing close-ups and you need that extra size screen to see what you're doing. It's got focus peak and everything on the screen. The one downside of using this, especially on a windy day, is it does tend to catch the wind and rock about. You can pair it with these. There's Sony NPF batteries that come in various sizes. It just tend to eat through the small ones, so you end up having to put the big one on. And that adds a lot of weight, it pretty much doubles the weight of the thing and makes your rig a bit top heavy. And I don't like the extra weight on the camera and the mount. So what I've actually done now is I use the D-tap cable that came with it, and I plug that into my small rig battery as well. So let's look at the rig all put together. So this is the rig. It's a Panasonic GH6 Olympus 300mm prime. I've mounted the Rode video mic on a clamp on the rods, and I've plugged in the audio to the mic jack, obviously. We've got the DesView video screen here with the HDMI straight into HDMI of the GH6, and also the power going down to the D-tap on the small rig V50 battery. That V50 battery is also plugged in via USB-C into GH6 to power that too, and that will last a good few hours. And it's all mounted, as you can see here, on the various small rig stuff I went through earlier. It gives a nice steady setup. I've got some good shots with it. It served me well. But I'll finish off by saying I've now upgraded my lens to a certain big, much faster zoom lens. And when I finalise the rig for that, I'll share that too if people are interested. So I hope you found that useful. If you've got your own video rig set up, do share it below in the comments. It's always good to see it. Other people like to see these sort of things as well, I'm sure. And thanks for watching. Do give it a like if you found the video useful. And do consider subscribing if you like wildlife photography, filmmaking, and British wildlife in general. See you in the next video.